All right, welcome back to Working Class Minds. Today we've got Brock Kelly here with us. Brock is a Division II athlete at Mississippi College, and more importantly, he's an athlete creative that is top tier at what he does. And you'll see from this interview how blue collar he really is, but I'm just really excited to have him today. So thanks for coming, Brock.
Dude, happy to be here.
Yeah,
Excited to sit and talk about my background in Mississippi and everything else.
Absolutely.
Anything training, psychology, whatever it ends up being.
For sure. Yeah, so let's talk about Mississippi. That's where you grew up, right, originally?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I grew up in Mississippi. I grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, actually Saltillo. Went to a small private school called TCPS, which was in the Tupelo area. And we were like a 1A school, and it was just super small. And so growing up, and I decided to start running, and I guess whenever I got to middle school in 7th grade, I started running, and it was kind of like, okay, let's see what the competition looks like. And to somebody who's just from Mississippi, who hasn't really experienced anything outside of Mississippi, it's like, okay, let's see if we can just get as good as we possibly can just in the state. And so right off the bat, I was like top 20 in the state or something in 7th and 8th grade.
Just first year.
Which is weird, because I think back on it, I'm like, there's not another state that's like that, but Mississippi's just one of those states that's never historically been really good, and I think that's kind of changing in recent years, but especially with availability of resources and stuff. But Mississippi's just never been one of those states that's super top tier at all. We're definitely in the bottom section, I think next to Hawaii or something.
Alaska.
It's like Alaska and Hawaii and then Mississippi, and they're just never been great. And so it's kind of it was kind of challenging growing up, because I didn't really have a whole lot of competition. I had that competition that was there, but as I got a little bit older and started to get a little bit better, it was most races would be time trials to an extent.
Right.
And so I had to learn at that age just kind of, okay, it was kind of just confusing figuring out how to train correctly, how to train properly, because it's what do I just do mile repeats every day, or what do I just run? I knew that I needed to run mileage, and I knew that there was something I needed to do in order to get better. And so I just kind of tried to train as hard as I could and do what I could and just listen to what my coaches said, and ended up being all right. But it was just kind of an odd scenario, especially not being one of the best states at running. You could run 16:30 in the 5K and win a state championship. There's not another state that's like that.
No, 100%.
And so it was just an odd setup for just being from Mississippi. And Mississippi's getting a lot better. Shout out Andrew Brown. Shout out the guys that are really pushing the sport forward. But historically, it's just not been one of those places where there's a lot of competition. So most of the races, especially for me being from a small 1A school, there wasn't any competition. I'd run 16:30, and the next closest guy would be 18:30.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of well, that's what I had, and that's what I experienced. So then whenever I got to college, it was kind of okay, we had to figure out how we're going to train properly. How I had actual competition for the first time, and I had a coach that kind of knew about training, and he knew what I needed to do in order to get better, and he had kind of a philosophy. And so started abiding by that philosophy, started figuring out how to train harder, and I realized, wait, there's a lot of people who are a lot better than I am, and it's kind of a hard thing to accept for a lot of people whenever you show up and you've always been the top dog in the state, and then all of a sudden you're middle of the pack or back of the pack, and it's dang, okay, we got to figure out how we're going to reassess this situation and how we're going to get better at running and at training and everything. And so that's kind of it's that moment.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, and you almost gotta just ask yourself the right questions, right? Because I feel like a lot of athletes go through moments and I know I went through this, I know you probably went through this as well, where I discovered that a high schooler ran a sub 16 5K back in high school, and that was that kind of blew my mind, and it allowed me to zoom out. And then when I zoomed out, then I started asking myself those right questions, is okay, how did he get there?
Yeah.
Right. And so I guess, when did that moment occur for you? When did you kind of discover the scope of how good high schoolers really were? And just
so so I think in Mississippi, I remember looking up to Grant Fisher. I remember seeing Grant Fisher whenever, because he was the top dog in the U.S. at the time, and I remember looking at how fast he was running, looking at the times he was running, and me being in 7th and 8th grade, I was like, oh yeah, I think I can get there someday. But I didn't realize all the coaching and all the training and everything that went into it, and I didn't really have those resources. So it's kind of okay, if I just go out and run really hard for 5 miles every day, then maybe I'll get there. And it's maybe naturally it'll happen or something. And so there was kind of that moment where Mississippi, I had a small scope for a long time throughout my high school career, especially, where I was just kind of okay, everything was, I guess, just I'm trying to think of how to explain it.
It's just you're kind of in
you're
your
in
space.
Mississippi. You're in your
bubble.
space.
You're in
Yeah.
your bubble.
Yeah. It was like Mississippi was the bubble that I was in, and it's like even though I knew these other athletes were outside of that bubble, it didn't really matter because I wasn't racing them. And then all of a sudden I show up to like a Foot Locker cross country championship, and then I get like 150th, and I'm like, oh, what do I do? Like, how did that happen? Or I don't remember what place I got, but it was like, okay, there's some guys that are a lot better than me. So how do I get to that level? What does that take? And it was just kind of an odd thing growing up in Mississippi where there wasn't necessarily a whole lot. There just weren't a ton of resources.
For sure. Well, I actually remember my first Foot Locker, and much like you said, where it's like, you know, you went out there and got 150th after having like having a really good season. I had done really well in like the Florida season and like my own bubble as well, and I just go out there and I get waxed. Like I was very much far back there, and I guess
it's at that point that you learn that there's like not really any shortcuts.
There's not. It's just like what are they doing? And so you brought up training availability, and I kind of wanted to bring this up about that. Is when we look at history, right? You know, go back a little bit. How are people training there, and how is that being spread? Well, it's not being nearly spread as fast as it is now, and so the issue back then was the availability itself.
Yeah.
But now the issue is, okay, what's the garbage? Like, right?
Yeah, filtering through all this stuff.
Yes, for sure. And so did you ever have, like, you feel like any moments of like questioning is like, like, does this work? Like, were you going through any experimenting and stuff?
So,
like, you know?
So I found this, I remember in high school, I forgot to even mention this detail, but I remember in high school I found a coach who he had coached the Tupelo High School girls team in like 2007, 2008. His name was Scott Brown. I'll talk to Scott like every now and then. He called me like, I don't know, last week or something. And so Scott talked to me, and I reached out to Scott and I said, hey, I need somebody to help me like train for cross country. Like I know you're probably the best suited in the area. And he was like, oh, for real? And I was like, yeah, like I just need somebody to help me. And my friend Dylan Allen, who he ended up running for Southern Miss for a while. He wasn't, not Dylan Allen from Kentucky, not the other Dylan Allen, but Dylan Allen from Southern Miss,
I hear you.
he was just a dog in Mississippi. And he was just a really good athlete. He's just the grindiest dude you'll ever meet. Yeah. Crazy. And you could just see, like, if he had the proper like right training, he would have just been unstoppable in any field. But you see guys like that. You have those stories.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah, and so he was another guy that was being trained by Scott. I was like, Scott, I need help with training. Like, can you help me with this? And so me and Dylan became training partners, and we are being trained by Mr. Scott.
Yeah.
And he was just giving us these workouts, and it was like 12 by 400 and 4 by 600, or like it would just be like these workouts are like 600 300 600 300 or 400 200 400 200, and it was good track workouts. And he'd kind of give them to us in the middle of the season, and then in the off season he had us doing like long runs and medium runs and like hard tempos on Saturdays. And it was just kind of the first time that I'd ever experienced a full like week of training, and I remember responding pretty well to it. I remember feeling stronger than I ever felt before, and I was like, wait a second, there's something to this. And it was kind of a key. It was kind of something that clicked in my mind. I was like, if I can figure out what the right formula for this is, then maybe I'll be able to get a scholarship or something. Maybe I'll be able to get to the best
if
that I
you can find the pieces to your puzzle. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's something I really think is important when it comes to that. And I feel like you probably responded really well to like the volume you were doing. Is that
Yeah, I mean, the volume, that was the most volume I'd ever done for sure. I was like maybe 60 miles a week, maybe 70 on like 1 week, and just kind of crazy because I'd been doing it like 30 or 40 every week leading up to that point, and then I was kind of like, well, let's see what we can do.
It's actually crazy because one of the most common questions that I get is, you know, like, how do I fix my running form? And or how do I get faster?
Run more.
And it's run more, yes. Run more. And it's just your body goes through motor learning, you know, you work out the kinks in your form, and same way when you run more volume or you run, you know, even if it's easy, then you start to make those aerobic adaptations, those compounding interest investments that you might not see it like. And a lot of times when kids are young, they're so adaptation friendly that they see it right there in that season, but the impact that it has 2 seasons down the road and 3 seasons down the road, it just, that's why the sport's so awesome.
It all compounds. Like everything you do, like whatever you did your freshman year it's all led up to, it's been like everything you've done your senior year, your 5th year is all just a result of the culmination of freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year. It's like it's all just, it's the whole picture. And everything, nothing you did freshman year, like everything you did during your freshman year created who you are your senior year or who you are in your 5th year or whatever it is. And like, it's kind of a crazy thing. And it's like, if you put in garbage in your freshman, sophomore, junior year, then it's kind of like, well, you got to figure out, okay, how can I bounce back from this and at least put in good work my senior year so that way I can have a good 5th year. Maybe it's like, how can I bounce back and put in good work my sophomore and junior year so I can have a good senior year? And it's kind of just this back and forth where you got to figure that out. But figuring out training, I mean, I feel like everybody's still trying to kind of figure it out, trying to figure out what works for them. And
Right.
there's definitely a balance there, but running more is definitely a good way to do it.
Yeah.
You find out a lot about yourself doing that.
I'm completely with you. And so this kind of a little good segue, I would say. I want to touch on your Boulder Summer, like last summer. And someone that's like chasing it and really going for it, and they set something out for themselves, and you were chasing 100 miles.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not something that everybody can do.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any like moment where it's like you're in the middle of that 100-mile week and it's like, damn, I'm just grateful to be here? Like, when,
yeah.
And when did that happen? How did that feel? Take me through it.
Yeah, I mean, those moments were definitely there. So that summer, I felt like I believed in my ability more than anything.
For sure.
And I was like, I think I can get to 100. And I believed that I could get to 100. And historically, I'd been like a 70-mile-a-week guy. But we'd done crazy density, like 5 workouts a week, like every week for like the entire, like all the time.
5 a week.
It's crazy. We do a long run Sunday. We'd have off plus weights on Monday. We'd have Wednesday tempo. Then we'd have a Tuesday workout. We'd have a Wednesday tempo. We'd have a Thursday off day. We'd have a Friday workout, like neuromuscular.
Yeah.
Then we'd have a Saturday. Saturday was usually recovery. So we'd have 3 recovery days, 4 out of 7 days. We'd be doing workouts pretty much throughout summer all the way to May. Like, there was never a time where we weren't doing workouts. That's 4 a week.
That's interesting.
And so that was our formula. And I was like, well, if we have this much density, then there's a good chance that if I take out like 2 of those workouts, I'll be able to hit 100, like no doubt. Like,
sure.
My body will be able to respond to it okay, and I'll be able to hit those mileage numbers. And so going into that, I had that confidence. I was like, yeah, like aerobically, I have a good enough system where I can run 100 miles a week. Let's see if the body can withstand it. And I knew if I could get to 100 miles a week, then I would be set up to have the most successful cross-country season that I ever had in my entire life. Mm-hmm. And so that was like I had this long scope, and I knew if I got hurt, then I would just regret it forever because I didn't take the chance.
Totally.
And that was the balance I was having to strike. I was like, okay, if I get hurt, then I didn't take the chance. If I get hurt, then it's like, okay, that's unfortunate. I took the chance. But then if I don't take the chance, then I'll never know what I'm truly capable of.
Just that question, like, just the question in the back of your mind, like going back and forth on whether you could do it. That's totally a lot. And
that transition from the summer back to Mississippi, we were whenever I was here, there's gravel roads everywhere in Boulder. That's mainly what I was running on.
Soft surface
everywhere.
Yeah.
And
runner's
then
paradise.
Whenever I got back to Mississippi, it's nothing but paved roads, 100%.
Okay.
We have like one gravel road, and we run it every 4 or 5 weeks, and it's crazy hilly, and it sucks.
Yeah.
But then every other run is paved, and I kept the mileage up high. And so I think that transition, whenever it was just nothing but pavement, for transitioning from like soft surface to nothing but pavement, I think that ended up giving me my stress fracture,
right,
which kind of ended my season. And now, as I'm looking back on it, I'm planning out the rest of this season, and I'm trying to figure out what's going to work best. And I think that it's just going to take a slower transition back to sea level, back home, and back to those paved roads where I can maybe jump back to 50 miles a week whenever I first get back, and see if we can slowly build back up to somewhere max around 80 and then hold it around there.
Yes.
So,
and when you get to season as well, like, you're going back to those paved roads, but also your quality's starting to increase, right? So the sessions are becoming slowly more race specific as you go on. And so, it's such a tough balance, especially when there's just a lot of us out there like you and I that are very much addicted to just running high volume, like we love it. It makes us feel good. And all this, it's really cool. But I do kind of want to touch on the injury process a little bit, because I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to. There's a lot of people that have went through injuries that have put them out for like an extended period of time. What would you say to someone that was in your position and they're really struggling to get out the door and go put in that cross training, put in that rehab, it's a lot of reps, a lot of time. What would you say to them?
So I think the biggest thing for me was just, I didn't try to replicate what my effort would have been if I if today I was going to go run 10 miles, I wasn't like, okay, how can I replicate that effort and go bike 20 on the bike?
Okay.
It was like I just wanted to be consistent. I just wanted to show up every day and do something. And so having that low barrier to entry, I could just show up every day and like hop on the stationary bike for 30 minutes. I could show up every day and go to the pool and swim for 30 minutes. It was something I was doing every day. And because of that, I think it set me up to where I didn't lose as much fitness as I would have lost, but it was like, okay, now as I'm building back in, I still have a lot of that aerobic fitness and I'm able to build back in much stronger than I would have if I had just kind of sat around, because I feel like the trap you can fall into is thinking you have to replicate your every effort, and that's overwhelming.
Yes.
Because you're transitioning to something you've never done before.
Completely different outlet.
Yeah, you're transitioning to cycling, you're transitioning to swimming, and to think that you have to do the exact same effort in the pool as you did whenever you'd go out and run a 18-mile long run is just crazy.
Right.
And it's so mentally overwhelming, and so people get overwhelmed and then they just don't do anything at all.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You know, I think practicality is important in the schedule.
Yeah.
If you don't have that practicality, then because there's a lot of athletes that are hungry, and you know they'll come to me or come to one of the coaches at Blue Collar, and they're like, you know, all right, what do I do for this? What do I do for this? What do I do for this? And I'm like, what can you do?
Yeah.
Like what, or not what I need to do. You know, asking that question I think is so important.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay. Kind of transitioning towards wrapping this up and, you know, giving the viewers a final takeaway.
Yeah.
And by the way, guys, like, Blue Collars it gets, as you can see, like
Just the dude from Mississippi.
Yeah, man, he's just a kid from Mississippi, and he shows up and gets the job done. And whenever he knew that it was something that he couldn't sustain, an injury, he was very intelligent with his approach, and he knew, I just need to clock into work every day. And so I think that's a great takeaway in itself. But what does Blue Collar mean to you?
I think in a lot of ways it's just that grit to just show up every day and just do the work that you're supposed to do. It sucks sometimes whenever you get injured and you can't do the work that you would like to do, and you have to do the work that you don't like to do, but it's still work. And it's like you just have to eat the food that's on the plate and go about your day. And I think that the Blue Collar approach is always just show up, do the work, make the money. What you put in is what you get out. You're on a wage. Like you're making $9.50 an hour, and you're just showing up. Or you're making more than that. You're making $20 an hour. It's like you're just showing up.
Sweat, aches, and then you get your wages from
and it's
that.
like that's what you're gonna get.
Right.
And over a long period of time, if you save up, if you keep all the money in the bank, you have results. I think that's the Blue Collar approach in a lot of ways. And I mean, we were talking earlier about the story about the coaches back in Mississippi. So
tell that real quick.
So back in like the 1970s, I think it was the 1970s. It could have been a little bit later. But Joe Walker, like historic track and field coach, one of the best coaches in the United States, like ever in track and field. He coached at Mississippi College for I think 4 seasons, and throughout those seasons, they like won Gulf South Conference championships. They had a lot of national champions, and one of the workouts that they did whenever they were there, so Coach Walker had them go out to a hill, and he set up hurdles on this hill, and they did 400-meter hurdle sprints up this hill. And the athletes started complaining. And it's like the workout in and of itself is so stupid, but the athletes all started complaining. And so Coach Walker hops in his car. He drives to the store. He gets some pacifiers, comes back, puts them all in the athletes' mouths and says, if you're going to act like babies, I'm going to treat you like babies, and I'll finish up the workout. And so then they go and they finish up this 400-meter hill sprint workout with pacifiers in their mouths. And they're just so pissed off at Coach Walker. And it's just... It was really cool they had a reunion back maybe a few weeks ago. And I got to be a part of that. I got to kind of see it and take photos. Wow. And it was just kind of cool to see those guys and how they interact with one another and see like literal Olympians that are there. And it was just cool.
That's actually unreal, man.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, such a cool story. Yeah. I literally have nothing to say. That's unreal.
It's so stupid.
Yeah. So.
And then they're like, well, I'll tell the steeple one too if you want.
Yeah. They got it.
So there was also another story that that whenever I was at the reunion, one of the guys started talking about how there was this athlete who ended up being national champion in the steeplechase, and he would go out and he would set up his benches around like this dirt track they had, and then he would dig his own steeple pit. So he'd bring his shovel out there, dig his own steeple pit. He just knew that the work that he had that had to be done. The work had to be done at some point. And he knew that, and he said, well, I have to go dig my own steeple pit. I have to put out my benches. I have to train for this if I'm going to actually get the results out of it. And that's the Blue Collar approach. It's like you clock in, you do the work, and you clock out. And it was like, we're going to make it happen. And so he dug his steeple pit hole, and he ended up being national champion and ran like 8:48 in the 70s and still holds, I think, the school record to this day.
Finding a way.
It's just he's found a way to do it,
Yeah.
and
So
yeah, it was just crazy.
that's awesome. Dude.
Yeah.
Dude, thank you so much for, coming on and providing
dude.
some of great stories, great wisdom, and I think there's a lot of takeaways that people can have from this. So yeah,
Definitely.
really appreciate it, Brock.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Follow Brock. We'll leave his social tags in the description. And yeah, man, just thank you so much for all the views on Instagram, and it's been awesome to see this grow, truly. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing more intelligent people like Brock, and yeah, just couldn't be more excited for the future. Thanks for watching.